Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Wednesday Wellness with the Wichita Symphony. This week, we're joined by film composer George S. Clinton and
Hello.
our music director Daniel Heggie. And with what we've been doing these last few weeks, we've been offering something different each week, whether it's like a chat or sharing a music therapy idea or just some different philosophies. Today, we're sharing an idea, and that's about a theme in music, and how it can change depending on what we're going through. And so back in May, George wrote me a violin solo called Notes from Lockdown for obvious reasons when we were locked down. And so in that violin solo was depicted all kinds of emotions that one would feel when they're locked down. And I asked a few other film composers to write the same kind of thing, something notes from lockdown. And I wrote something. But this piece has continued to live in my repertoire. I've performed it now probably 10 times for various Zoom concerts. And the theme is now being morphed into a new piece. And we're going to talk about that today. So, welcome, everybody. So,
Thank you, Holly.
Hey,
um, George, can you tell us about what inspired the themes of this piece?
one of the things that inspired it was wanting to use the time that I had because of being locked down and the feelings that I was having about being locked down, wanting to try to find a way to channel that into music. And so one of the things that I do when I score a film is when I watch a scene before I even write one piece of music, I make a list of words that come to my mind as I'm watching the scene. Maybe happy, sad, agitated, maybe some silly word like tomato. But whatever it is, I write it down. I don't judge it. And then I go back and I look at those words and think about the feelings that I had at that moment. And when I get stuck, if I get stuck in writing a scene, I'll often go back to those words and think, oh, yes, that's right. I did say it was mysterious. And sometimes that'll get me out of being stuck. So, one of the things that I tried to do with this particular piece was to express the feelings that I was having then. And the piece itself is in four sections: A, B, C, B, I guess. And it sort of is like slow, fast, slow, fast. The first part, the slow parts are sort of dark, and the fast parts are kind of bright. But the two fast parts differ in their emotional content. And so I thought it might be interesting just to talk about that first part, which is sort of scared and feeling alone and feeling uncertain. You don't know what's going to happen, and yet you have these thoughts about trying to stay positive. Then it goes to the B section where it's almost like a manic attempt at staying positive. I'm not going to let this get the best of me. And so the more you try, the more manic it becomes and the more determined you get till the final part of that where it kind of dips down into the, the second slow section, the C section, which is boredom and real sadness and this feeling of almost hopelessness that things are not going to get better, that they're just going to continue to be marked same day after same day after same day. And then at the end of that, it does have a moment of resolution where I was saying to myself, okay, I'm going to have to go through this, but I am going to make the best of this, but not in this manic way that I did before. I'm just going to pick myself up and try to be positive about moving forward. And that's what that final fast section is about. So those were sort of the things that were going through my head at that time.
And I sent your score of this to Daniel because Daniel always like he sees and hears things um, differently than me, and it helps me be a better musician and interpret
Huh.
things. So, Daniel, did you have anything that struck you about this piece?
I just think that my ideas were very similar to George, but George, you put it in such a uh, just a better kind of category each section. Um, the beginning is kind of hesitant, and then I think even certain notes where they come in, they're unexpected. After the first couple of phrases and this kind of tentativeness, and that does have that feeling of being a little bit scared, like what's going on. The manic section, absolutely, I agree. The third section, the C section, I saw with all these leading tones is kind of like this still wanting to reach for
Mm,
something
mm,
because it isn't quite resolved and is sitting there on these sometimes major sevenths or just these dissonances that are trying to go one way or the other, but a
right,
very unsettled feeling with those low pizzes as pizzicatos as sort of a steady drip of the monotony
right,
of life, like that drip, drip,
right.
Yeah.
and but on top of it is the kind of tension, and I think that's what a lot of us feel during this time is this. There's a sameness, but there's also that we're still wrestling inside because we're human beings and we don't want to be static. We want it to move,
Mm,
but there's that static thing that's holding us like an anchor. And I
good
felt
point.
like those were the two things going on at the same time in the C section, the
Uh-huh.
second slow section. And then I did feel a difference in the last section, which is kind of a reprise of the earlier second section, the fast part, because it did feel like it was more just full of elation. And we don't have a choice, but we have to be optimistic.
Right.
And that's so there's a sense of victory in that, I feel,
That's true.
in that
Victory.
one.
Yeah.
It,
So I love the piece. I was listening to it again and going through with the music, and I
Thank
love it.
you.
I love how Holly plays it too.
oh,
Me
thanks.
too.
It's been really therapeutic for me to, get a piece of music to play in such a time when we're not playing much, but also to each time that I've played this for people, we've discussed what people feel. And it's like, oh, you felt that too? Thank goodness I wasn't the only one. Because I was kind of ashamed to say I was bored. That's something that, only boring people get bored, I was taught. I just didn't want to be boring. So the C section, the pizzicatos that happening, that um, analysis of time just trudging by, and just that boredom was really interesting. And the manic sections, somebody said, "This is me wanting to clean the entire house in one day." Because what else are we going to do?
Exactly.
And I
That's
thought,
good.
gosh, yeah, absolutely. I've done that. I've organized the whole house in one day, and then set like a lump the next day, which was the C section in this. So I'm going to play just a bit of each section just to give you the opening, kind of think the sadness. And the thing that struck me about this were the rests, because as a solo, I don't know, what do you do with rests? It felt very vulnerable.
Hmm.
So, and even listening to the recording, I was like, are people gonna like know that's kind of a vulnerable thing for a soloist? So this is the opening theme. There's such a contemplative theme.
Yeah, that's you're right. The rests, to me, it's like thoughts. The way thoughts come into your mind, they just sort of float in, casually,
Yeah.
and then maybe after a moment, another one that's connected will float in as well, and then there'll maybe be a series of thoughts after that. So a lot of this has to do with inner dialogue, really. And the other thing I wanted to say too is I'm really fortunate in the sense that I get to work with you, Holly, in realizing this, because it's a back and forth that makes it possible for it to be as first of all musical as it is, because I don't play the violin, and so you keep me honest about that, and then also you have very good instincts in terms of your emotional vocabulary and the way that you experience things. And so your input is always really valuable.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Um, yeah, the main theme continues on, but I'll play the manic section next, kind of Irish kind of jig sound. Et cetera, et cetera. Just even feeling manic, this is a kind of piece that a musician would want to rush on and kind of like just you lean forward into. And I can almost think if I was playing this in an orchestra, the conductor would be like, steady, because there is such an urgent moving forward gallop about this theme.
It is so propulsive, and you can feel it. It's just like the beginning of that fast section, this bump, 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 this like fast heartbeat that just accelerates, and finally it bursts out of the gate. And when it's going, it's kind of going, looking in all directions, and then the lack of symmetry in some of the patterns, where it just starts over again, like in a compressed bar of 3/4 or something, the pattern begins again when, instead of falling in the symmetrical way, adds to that urgency and the kind of, what are we going to do? And it has this manic energy, I think is illustrated in these musical devices. Also the range of going up high and down low and all of those things together. It's interesting, the toolbox that you're exploiting, for creating this feeling.
It's funny that you mentioned the heartbeat and thinking, what are we going to do? Because I know I'm not alone, having woken up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding, like, what am I going to do? Or what are we going to do? Or what's going to happen? That's what's so great about music, is it really helps, facilitate the feeling. It helps you kind of like work it out just a little bit, at least for me. Sometimes when I find that I'm practicing something and that feeling kind of dissipates, and same with listening to it as well. And we talked about that on our first offering of the ISO principle of meeting an emotion with the same kind of music. So if you're feeling like really agitated or manic or want to clean the whole house in an hour, this is your theme.
Put it on loop. Yes.
Yes. It's really tuneful. And then the third theme that comes, what George does so well, and he does this in a lot of his film scores, is he does this kind of blend of themes, and as one fades out, the other kind of takes over. And it's one thing I just think is one of his greatest talents. So I'll see if I can lead into the end of the manic section into the analysis of time. Let's see, a good place to start. Probably could hear my neighbors building upstairs. So that constant theme of the pitsing kind of being the heartbeat, really, this is supposed to represent boredom, time passage. This is the hardest part of the piece. So for me as a musician to learn this totally took me out of like bored. It focused my concentration so much. This took quite a while, because it's like rubbing your head or rubbing your stomach, patting your head, saying the alphabet backwards, kind of, for me. I don't know.
Well, yeah, combining both of those techniques, your arco, you're playing the bow on 2 strings, and you're picking the other 2 strings with the opposite hand. And, it's amazing that you just, you really took that as a challenge and made it your own. In fact, it's the way you've adapted it is even, I think, more effective than what I had actually originally written there, in terms of the way that you combine the way you continue to play the sustained notes while you're picking as they end.
Oh, yeah, a little later there's that
Exactly.
it's just fun. And that's one of the cool things why I like working with living composers is because like I can call you up and say, hey, do you mind if I try this?
That's
And
right.
you're always awesome. You're always like, yeah, sure.
Listen, I anything that makes me sound better, I'm into. No. What I was going to say is that what Daniel said about the longing above this pulse thing, that is so accurate. I hadn't really been able to articulate it for myself, but that's exactly what it is. This sense of wanting to move to resolve it, and these unresolved tones are, playing and trying to resolve over the top of this pace that they're being held back by. And that's true. I hadn't realized that's exactly what it was.
Well, I was thinking, even people listening to this, because it sounds so beautiful and euphonious and nice to the ear to hear this. But yet, if you were to put the notes right next to each other, it's a chord cluster. I mean,
Yeah.
it's spread out so that it has this very open sound. The way the chord is voiced, it doesn't sound very clashing, but yet there are dissonances there because you have a G against an A against an F sharp.
Mhm.
And so those notes you don't always see those together in a lot of tonal music. And so there is this sense that it wants to settle, and yet that humdrum just
Right.
going on top of it. I think it's interesting because it shows how calm music in its tempo can create angst, and a sense of unrest, which I think is a fascinating idea.
I wouldn't now when I play this the next time I play it through, I will think of that unsettled. And I'm so glad that you brought those the leading tones and the unsettling because it will help me play it differently. I think better now. I hear it different. That's one of the greatest things about kind of collaborating and discussing a piece. Love that. As this piece transitions, it goes into like a kind of a recap from the beginning. The theme flips around, it flips upside down. So there's still rests. But there's a really cool chord coming up. And in the original version, I hope you don't mind, George, we were gonna end it like this.
That's right.
It was just gonna end. And I called this the vitamin C chord because it was just so bright. And it was supposed to end like that, but we changed it to add the pizzas in to give it that little, time management kind of feeling. But I love that brightness of that chord. It just, I don't know, it's so bright.
I think it's really wonderful being part of this conversation because this really speaks to what you've been talking about in your Wellness Wednesdays, which is the context with which we hear music and experience it. And then when we share it, the different things that each one of us has said about what this music at particular moments means to us or creates within us in terms of the way we react to it. So much so that I'm hearing things that you guys heard in it that I'm going, yeah, they're right.
Well, I will play.
And I wrote it. So
Yeah.
it's so cool to hear other people add their own experience of it.
I think that to me, that's one of the things that I think is so special about music is the comparing of the notes and getting that just kind of like the big point of views because it only enhances the experience for everybody. So after that vitamin C chord, it goes right back to that really cool, invigorating theme. And I won't play the whole thing. We're going to put the entire notes from Lockdown violin solo at the end of this this conversation, the entire thing. It's a better recording. But I think that the themes are really, they do stick with you, which is cool. And oh, Daniel.
No, I was just going to say, it already, I mean, since I've been listening to it and looking at the music, it's really been just lingering there. All these things that we've been talking about, the introduction, posing different thoughts, the kind of propulsive quality of the fast sections, it is something that just kind of gets under your skin in the best of ways. Definitely. And I was just going to comment earlier on what, George was saying about, here you had written it and then you're hearing these other ideas. I think that's what's so beautiful about the creative process on your part, the recreative process on Holly's part, and then just the listening. I'm always curious about the creators of any particular art, a poem, a story, a movie, the music, whether the composer, it's so intuitive to the person that they actually are feeling the things that we're articulating, but they just haven't brought them to their conscious level in some ways, but it's in here somewhere. I just remember talking to a poet once about, and how you made the meter the same each time on these verses. And they're like, I had no idea. And like, I didn't know I did that. But thanks for pointing that out. Yet they're the one that wrote it. I think that sometimes it's because the intuitive level is so deep inside that they're not consciously doing it, but they are doing it as part of the artistry overall.
Right.
That's a very good point. I think if Bach were alive and you were to sit down and with an analysis of his fugue, he may not necessarily agree with the way we've come to analyze what he did. He just did it, and there were rules at that time, but they certainly weren't as strict as we have made them over the years, and in terms of composing, and not so much now, but as what they became. Mm-hmm. But you're exactly right. I mean, it's mostly intuitive.
Right. Yeah. Well, one of the exciting things that I wanted to present the idea today is taking a point of view or a place and time where you're feeling some way, and then that same theme in a different time might mean something different. And George, you've taken this theme and you've turned it into the sixth movement of a piece that we haven't even premiered yet. You wrote the Old Cowtown Suite over the summer, probably started it in June or July, maybe?
Yeah.
And can you talk about the suite and how this fits in?
Well, the suite is a result of me having visited the Old Cowtown Museum when I was there in Wichita for the first time with Holly and also Don Reinhold, who drove us through the snow to the Old Cowtown Museum. And I don't know, it just affected me so emotionally that I even told Holly there as we visited, I'm going to write a piece about this place, and actually did to my astounding amazement. But it turned out to be an emotional journey for me. And the first piece has already been premiered by the orchestra that I finished, the Prairie Reminiscence. And you guys did such a beautiful job. Daniel, your interpretation of it was just, I mean, a dream in terms of your conducting of it. And then the video they did of it, I thought was really beautiful as well. So as I visited each one of these places, I had specific feelings about them. And then when I revisited those feelings in my head and started writing this piece, one of the most profound moments in visiting Cowtown was meeting Rosie the cow, who at that time, because it was winter, was the only cow in Cowtown. And she was just the sweetest animal you're ever going to want to meet. She came up and nudged you like a dog and, was so happy to see us. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to write a piece that was about Rosie. And so I decided that the final piece would be Rosie dreaming of the herd, because she's all by herself in her stall. And what does she think about? The only cow in Cowtown at night, and it's cold outside. And so I imagined she would be dreaming of herself as a calf, running with the herd, dancing under the stars, doing all this stuff eventually. But initially it would be her alone in her stall. And so as I started trying to imagine this moment musically, the theme that kept appearing in my head was the Notes from Lockdown theme of this same feeling of being alone and being a little scared and not knowing exactly what was going to be happening. And so rather than denying that, I decided to take the same path that wonderful composers like Handel and Aaron Copland have taken and repurposed this piece of music for another use. And so if Aaron Copland could do it with fanfare for the common man and move that into the third movement of his third symphony, or fourth movement, I can certainly do that with this theme to make it apply to Rosie. But when I did that, it wasn't just the lonely part of the theme that worked. It was the manic part of the theme suddenly became joyous because I was looking at it in a completely different way. I was looking at it through the eyes or the mind of a cow dreaming about what it was like to be in the herd. And so because I was going to do it with orchestra instead of just soloist, I was able to orchestrate it in a way that brought out the joyfulness of it and what she might be imagining running with the herd or any of that stuff. But it just goes to show you that a specific piece of music experienced one time in a particular way can have a completely different meaning if the context is changed. And I'm sure we've all had that experience, just hearing a piece of music because of the mood that we're in, because of what it meant to us emotionally at that time. Later on, hearing that same piece of music, it doesn't resonate in the same way. Maybe it means something totally different to us at the later point in our lives. So that happens with composers too.
Well, I will play, I'm going to stop and start it, the sample, and then we're also going to have a better quality recording of this at the end of the conversation. But just to get this feeling, it's exactly the same theme, but it feels different. It feels different.
Yeah, well, imagine Rosie, the beautiful cow, all alone in her stall, and at first she's sad, and then she starts dreaming of when she was a lovely little calf.
Well, I think the thing that I kind of wanted to convey to everybody watching and experiencing this is how music can be used, and just turning a page or turning it from a different view, the same music can have a different meaning. And I think there's so many examples, like you said, George, in Handel, you can hear the same music in different other pieces that he's written. It's constantly reused, repurposing, but it also kind of gives a different perspective. And I think that's the power of the listener, to be able to acknowledge that you can have the same music, but then enjoy it differently, or use it differently, or feel it differently. And I think this example of Notes from Lockdown to Rosie Missing the Herd, same music, different feelings. I mean, I went from feeling back, just playing this, the Notes from Lockdown, feeling that just wonder where things are going to be, to imagining a cow dancing in a green pasture. And I feel super happy from that now, super happy.
And to me, as a composer, what you said before about the power of the listener to, change their mind or change their experience, you do have power as a listener. You're not at the always at the mercy of the artist. In fact, that's where the real power lies. Art is just created, but the way it is received, and the power that you have in the reception of it, to express that back, just the way even our conversation is done today, I think is really what artists live for, is to hear back from people who have experienced it and have a different feeling about it, altogether. Unless they think it sucks, then I don't want to hear about it.
I was going to say, I think that you've hit right on the essence of it. Something that Holly and I have been discussing on a regular basis is that the power is with the listener, because we present it. And a lot of times music that doesn't, of course, have any text, it doesn't have necessarily any inherent meaning. I mean, there are a lot of notes together, and it can make a lot of people feel a certain way, I suppose. But it's really the power of the listener to say, this made me feel this way, or think about this thing. And every listener is right, no matter how different one view is from another. And I think that that's so vital. It's so important to remember. The other thing I was going to just mention is that sometimes when a theme comes back later in the same piece after it's been developed and changed, and it can be the same melody, but now it's lived through this lifetime or these years of experience, that are compressed into the listening time in
Right.
between the themes. You hear the theme differently because it's lived through a life. And it's very similar to us. We're going to be repeating certain things every day of our lives, but in the meanwhile, we're living our lives. We're understanding things in different ways. So that's the other thing it just made me think of, when we hear something that's the same, that's now comes back again, the same, but after experience.
Right. And that's the common denominator: time and experience, and being open to change.
Yeah.
I think that's those are the three things that can lead to a really full life. It was realizing the effect of time and the effect of experience, and being open to change.
Definitely. Well, I want to thank you both for being here today, and to guide us through this idea of watching a theme kind of migrate to a different purpose. And I want to invite everybody to listen to music differently this week. When you listen to music that happens in movies, especially, how is it impacting you emotionally? And own that feeling and really be in power of that feeling. Having George here kind of hopefully will encourage you to watch a few of his movies, maybe Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, or Austin Powers, or I don't know. Do you have a favorite, George?
Oh, well, I got a bunch of favorites, but the two you mentioned are two of my favorites for sure.
Really outstanding scores. And so watch movies, listen to the music differently, and we're going to put the entire violin solo after this conversation, and also the little snippet from the sixth movement of the Cowtown Suite.
And people who listen to I'll click on the link for the entire solo, so it won't just be music without any video. I've put along there some color boxes that are just there as representational. The colors don't mean anything unless they mean something to you. And so it'd be interesting to see how you react to that, because I tried to keep it very simple and very unpresumptuous. It's simply offering colors at certain moments in the score. just so there'll be a visual element. But as I was watching it, I was realizing that suddenly I was investing emotion into these colors. And it's the human is amazing. I mean, we look for the opportunity to emotionally connect with things, and that's just our nature.
Right. Well, I will wrap this up and invite you all to join us again next Wednesday for the next Wednesday Wellness. In the meantime, thank you again for joining us, and thank you, Daniel, and thank you, George.
Thank you,
Thank
Holly.
you, Holly.